With Election Day just 53 days away, Joe Biden is maintaining a lead in most national polls as he enjoyed throughout the summer, but the polls have narrowed in some key battleground states.
And of course, as 2020 has proven, anything, literally, can happen between now and Election Day. But the road to 270 electoral votes will be decided in just a handful of states, and one of those states is Minnesota. In a recent poll from Survey USA, Biden continues to hold a 9-point lead in that state, and Democrats, though, are still worried that Trump could be gaining ground there.
That's right. So joining us to discuss the state of the race in Minnesota is radio host, author, and Professor Aaron Brown. Welcome, Aaron. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Our pleasure.
So, could you give us a little bit of a rundown of the state of Minnesota, the state of the race there, and maybe what the national media does not know that we should about what's going to happen on Election Day?
Sure. The first thing that's obvious is that Minnesota really should be considered in the same league as the other swing states that went for Donald Trump in 2016, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. A lot of the same demographics, especially with Michigan, with one large metro area surrounded by a much larger state, including a large rural area in the north. And you were just talking about northern Minnesota. That's where I am. And I think what we see in Minnesota is a big split in political attitudes from the majority of the state living in the metro area, the suburbs, and the metro core, and then greater Minnesota, and it's almost an entirely different economy, an entirely different culture in many ways, and that's really what's driving the politics more so than, say, a policy or anything like that. It's really a culture war, and I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of states like Minnesota.
Can you talk specifically about the Iron Range and that cultural shift? Because this is an area that used to be strongly Democratic. It seems like still a lot of the local elected officials are Democrats, but have come out and endorsed Donald Trump. Well, give us a little bit of the history and the context and what you think accounts for that shift.
Yeah, I mean, the Iron Range is a historical gem of the United States. It was the area that fed the iron that won World Wars I and II and built up the industrial nation of America in the 20th century. And it's not well known, but kind of in the background were these little towns where these workers from all over the world gathered to mine the iron ore. And historically, I mean, it was very Republican when it started, and then as the labor unions gained strength, it became a strongly Democratic area after World War II until quite recently when it became more of a swing area. You can kind of compare what happened here to what happened in Appalachia after the 1970s when a lot of the unions were broken in Appalachia. You can compare it to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and what happened when their copper mines closed. We've seen automation and technology reduce the number of jobs. Efficiencies, corporate consolidations have eliminated the jobs that once the area was known for, iron mining, and replaced them with fewer, much more technical jobs, very good jobs. Mining is one of the best paying jobs around. But the rest of the region and the people who work here are struggling to make ends meet, trying to make things work. And a lot of the problems that we experience are very similar to those of the rest of rural America, trying to find a new purpose when your economic fortunes have changed.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, what we've seen, Aaron, let's throw Nate Silver's tweet up there on the screen, is we actually haven't seen quite a bit of high-quality polling out of the state of Minnesota. You mentioned that Minnesota was actually quite tight last time, and she could be considered in this league of a battleground state. What are the key issues going to be in this election? Obviously, coronavirus, but is there some talk locally about trade with China? We recall, of course, at the RNC, the Democratic mayor talking about Chinese tariffs and about the return of steel manufacturing jobs. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, that's locally, it's an important issue here. And I'd say that it's very broadly misunderstood and highly political. In other words, your politics will dictate how you describe that issue. The facts of the matter are in the late part of President Obama's second term, there was a mini trade war China was dumping steel into the U.S. economy because of overproduction for various local reasons in China, and it was causing steel prices to drop, and it was causing mines in northern Minnesota and steel mills all over the country to close and shutter temporarily. That cost a lot of jobs, and President Obama implemented some targeted tariffs near the end of his term. Well, it was also amid President Trump running for election and arguing on trade, saying he's going to put tariffs on China. So when President Trump came into office, he got a lot of credit locally for the tariffs, which were already in place. The mines reopened as President Trump took office. Today, because of the coronavirus, a lot of the mines closed over the summer because of decline in demand and other economic and logistical issues with the virus itself. And now there's still a mine that's not open. So actually, there's fewer mines open now than when President Trump started. Nevertheless, if you talk to people locally, they talk about those trade measures being very important. Arguably, they're less important than the state of the domestic economy, which has fueled steel demand. And that's really what it's all about.
And how do the numbers shake out? I think we have some polling here that breaks down the sort of regional divide, but you laid it out very effectively, too. This is the overall RCP average, which has Biden up 5 in the state. But how do the numbers shake out regionally? I mean, what you're describing, Minnesota, is kind of playing out across the country, this rural-urban divide, with the suburbs now swinging strongly into the Democratic camp. Is that enough in a state like Minnesota to be able to win, even if you are losing badly in a lot of the rural areas, if not all the rural areas?
In 2018, we saw kind of the backslide of what Trump had gained in 2016, and we saw that the Democrats continued to lose those votes in rural Minnesota. For instance, in the 8th district, a Republican was elected to Congress and is now a favored incumbent for re-election. But you still saw huge gains in the suburbs. You saw 2 Democrats elected in previously Republican districts there. So actually, the math is such that if the Democrats maintain their gains in the suburbs and the Republicans maintain their gains in the rural area, that adds up to a Democratic victory. Not a huge one, but if 2018 holds, it's a Democratic victory. If 2016 holds, and Democrats suffer losses in the suburbs, then you could say that it'll be really close with a chance for Trump to win.
So if you were going to give the Trump campaign advice, I mean, at this point, it looks like they're down a bit in the polls, but they seem to be making a strong play for the state. What do they need to do to overcome the current deficit?
Well, I think they need to figure out a way. They would need to figure out a way to appease the voters in the metro area who are on the fence, who have gone over to Democrats because of the perception of either mismanagement or radicalism or whatever they think of Trump. They would need to reassure those voters, because right now they're very mad and they don't like how the virus pandemic response has gone. They don't like the tone, and there would need to be some reassurance there. What he's actually doing is trying to drive up his numbers in places where he's already doing well. He's coming to Bemidji, which is a regional center in northwestern Minnesota, next week, a small town, relatively speaking, for presidential campaigns. So he's trying to run up the votes in rural areas. He's doing very well in rural areas. So we'll see if he also manages to get the votes that he's already lost. I think that's the only way he really wins.
Yeah. Fabulous to have your insights, Aaron. Let people know where they can follow you on Twitter or where they can keep up with what you're saying about the state.
Absolutely. MinnesotaBrown.com is my blog, and PowerInTheWilderness.com is the podcast that Carl Jacob and I are doing about the history of the Iron Range, and you may find that interesting, too.
We love it.
Power in the Wilderness. Love it. Thank you so much, Aaron. Great to have you.
Thank you.
So some journalists are saying that Bob Woodward actually aided Trump by concealing vital information from the American people. Friend of the show, David Sirota, is going to make that case when Rising continues.